Welcome to the Word on Wednesday. This is your midweek online Bible study and devotion at Mackville Christian Church for July the 8th, 2026. I think back about this last weekend. It was such a great Independence Day weekend at Mackville Christian. Many of you celebrated our nation's 250th birthday, and that's quite a milestone for our country. An incredible milestone. As I mentioned in Sunday's sermon, there's not very many republics that have lasted 250 years. So I'm thinking about what a great country we do live in and how thankful I am to live in the United States of America. And despite the fact Sunday that many in our congregation were traveling on vacation or whatever, our attendance was very close to our yearly average, and I was very thankful for that. Then I also think about our nation again. Our nation has celebrated so many victories on the world stage, but sometimes we often forget our nation has been so victorious for Jesus Christ so many times. And I'm so thankful that God has used the United States of America in the way that He has over the past 250 years. You know, in the United States, we celebrate and we remember the fact that a group of colonies united only in their cause of independence from Great Britain somehow defeated the greatest army in the world at the time. The colonials, their army was underfunded, it was under-equipped, it was not well trained, yet they defeated the British army to gain independence. You know, yeah, they had help from France. We know that. But most importantly, the people who were fighting for independence were united in that cause. And that motivated them to victory. You know, I see a little bit of a parallel, maybe a lot of parallel in that as to what happened in Joshua chapter 6. You know, we've been looking at Old Testament personalities since the first of the year, and we've been looking at Joshua over the last few weeks. And what we're going to be looking at in Joshua chapter 6 is probably the most well-known incident in his life. It's the destruction of Jericho. But the people were simply united in following God's will and fulfilling what God wanted. And there, you know, this is a great episode. There's several songs written about it in several different genres. You may have heard some of them. I'm thinking of them as I'm talking this morning. But to refresh your memory, the Israelites were taking the land that God had promised them. They'd crossed the Jordan River, and now Jericho was standing in front of them as the first city that they would have to conquer. Now remember, again, this band of Jews was not a well-trained army. Yet they were coming on this great city in Jericho. But if you go back to Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9, God told Joshua, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." He repeated those words or similar ones to Joshua when he took over as leader of Israel. Be strong and courageous. In other words, God was saying, I have your back. Sometimes we need to remember God has promised us that He has our back. I think about what happened there at Jericho. God's going to act and show His power, both to the Jews and to their enemies. You may remember how God said He was going to act in Joshua 6, 1 through 5. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. But God told Joshua that his fighting men should march around Jerusalem once a day for 6 days. 7 priests would have ram's horns with them in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Then on the 7th day, they were to do that 7 times. And after the 7th time, the priests would blow their trumpet, and everyone would give a great shout, and the walls, as the old song says, would come tumbling down. I was trying to think, how would I feel if I was a citizen of Jericho at that time? I can't imagine what those people were thinking. They were inside their thick walls. Those walls are seemingly impenetrable. But here they saw the Jews walking all the way around them, as a distance most scholars think of about 1.5 miles around the town. And they saw them do that every day. Now, 1.5 miles is really not that far, and so scholars feel that it wasn't that long of a march every day. I know when I walk, I can do 1.5 miles in less than half an hour. Taking into account there were many of these people and all, I'm guessing maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours at the most to walk around. But you had to wonder what was going through the people's minds there in Jericho. After a day or two, I imagine they were saying, what are they doing? I wonder if they laughed at them. I wonder how they reacted. But that's where we pick up in Joshua chapter 6 and verse 15. We see how God worked. God worked and showed his power. Read along with me in Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 15. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priest had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city, and the city and all that is within should be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from things devoted to destruction, lest you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all into the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. This event, by the way, as I was preparing this, I was looking up, and archaeologists have found remains in this area that seem to indicate an agreement with the passage of Scripture here. But this event teaches us that we can clearly be successful only when we follow God's will and do things in his way. The Jews might have tried to conquer Jericho on their own, and they would have failed. God said, "I'll take care of things. Just do what I tell you." Many times we allow our own thoughts and our own prejudices and everything else in our lives to cloud our thinking and our actions. We think we have better ideas, even in the church, but we need to follow God's plan. Rely on him. It breaks my heart when I see Christians acting with little faith, especially When I think about what John wrote in the New Testament, he says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, little children, you are from God and have overcome them, for he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. Or in 1 John 5, verses 4 and 5, for everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? Look, be victorious. If you look back in Joshua chapter 6, verses 20 and 21, God acted and the people acted upon that victory. They carried out that destruction of Jericho. Everything was destroyed except for Rahab the prostitute and the people that were with her, because as we looked at a few weeks ago, she hid some spies and she was granted a safe passageway. Folks, I want to challenge you, encourage you, implore you to believe that God works in mighty ways. We're at almost our 200th anniversary at Macville. 5 more weeks after this coming Sunday. 5 more weeks. 6 weeks from today. Just look at what God's done. Don't just look at your immediate surroundings, but look how God has worked mightily in the little town of Macville. 200 years ago, people formed Macville Christian Church. It grew rapidly. We have photos verifying that. I've been looking at. I think of the work of groups like Men for Christ. Think of the churches that have been started throughout Kentucky. Macville was a part of that. Of course, I think of the many people who have been a part of Camp Calvary. Macville was one of the founding churches of Camp Calvary. I think of all the people that have been impacted by Camp Calvary. In fact, I think about, since I've been at Macville, someone has told me that they found some records of the earliest meetings of Camp Calvary housed at Macville Christian Church. They're now at Camp Calvary, though. I don't think that God is through with us. I really don't. My charge to you is step forward boldly. Be strong and courageous, because God still works. Folks, I love you all. And I can't wait to see you Sunday at Macville. I'll see you then. Sunday school at 9:30, worship service at 10:30. See you then, and take care. Have a great week.